I think a term that's getting a lot of traction right now is finesse plastic surgery or finesse facial plastic surgery. And the term finesse is oftentimes equated with naturalness, but it's also equated with subtlety. So I want to sort of give you my take on what I think about finesse plastic surgery or finesse facial plastic surgery. So I'll start with first talking about a patient story about a woman that I did many years ago. I did a rhinoplasty for her. I love using this example for my patients because she had a very large hump on her nose, a pretty broad tip, pretty large nostril show from the side view. And I took down her hump very naturally, did not scoop her nose out, did not pinch a tip, and made the tip look much more elegant, reduced the nostril show from the side view. She looked significantly better. And she went to her workplace and no one really knew why she looked better. She just looked significantly better and they just thought she just looked good. And no one said, hey, did you have a rhinoplasty done? Another story is I had a gentleman who is in Norwood 6 baldness. I recently did his second transplant about close to 12, 13 years later, still with quite a bit of hair on his head. But a Norwood 6 is someone that is totally bald, there's no hair on his head, and now he had a full head of hair. He's a physician, and believe it or not, no one could figure out why he looked better. And here's a guy that's completely bald that has a lot of hair on his head. Were these results subtle in that regard? No, they weren't subtle at all. Were they natural? Yes, absolutely natural. Were they detectable? Surprisingly not. So here's what's interesting is oftentimes these dramatic differences in patients, when they're done in a way that's very natural, oftentimes are not even spotted by others. They just look better. The reason on celebrities, oftentimes, we're looking at these before and afters and we're saying these is finesse work, is the fact that it's hard to tell what's going on, and because they were done naturally. So sometimes, to me, a finesse work oftentimes could be equated with just something natural. But of course, it also has more to do with subtle differences. So I just want to be very careful before we dive into this, is to use and understand the word subtle is oftentimes misused, because I hear people say, look, I want something conservative and subtle, and what they're really saying to me is they don't want fake. They don't want to look unnatural. And I did a whole video last week called Your Standard of Naturalness is Too Low. And that's absolutely true, because oftentimes we think that a natural result is something that must be very barely perceptible. And these examples that I just told you, they weren't anything but subtle, but they're so natural no one could tell. Does that qualify as a finesse procedure? Well, maybe it doesn't, because finesse work today, what we're thinking about, someone that has a slightly broader nasal tip that wants a little bit more refinement. Some of the Kardashians, we've talked about how they've just looked a little bit better. Is it something obvious? Now, of course, sometimes you're talking about a very large butt for Kim or whatever it may be, and that's simply something not subtle, but I would say they actually start to go beyond natural. And so like the lip enhancements, those are not finesse at all. In fact, they sometimes breach the idea of naturalness. So I want to really frame the thinking for you before we actually go into the concept of subtlety in finesse work, is to distinguish this and say, what I want you to get is a natural outcome. Anything that's unnatural is not even worth investigating or thinking about. Now, when we think about finesse work, then, is what is worth it? Is a finesse procedure worth it? Well, here's what I also like to talk about is 1 + 1 = 3. Now, that's bad math, but what that basically means is that when you're doing a lot of little things, cumulatively, there's an improvement. So I also encourage you to listen to my video that I shot last week about right versus left brain thinking, because what is finesse about things is examining the face with the right brain and just seeing that people look better, even though architecturally you cannot pinpoint exactly what I did. So finesse work has a lot to do also with 1 + 1 = 3. So what does this mean? So let's say you're doing really minor work where it's maybe just some skin textural changes, or it's a fine rhinoplasty improvement, or it's just a little eye bag you want improved, and you say, well, is that finesse? So oftentimes, to me, a single standalone finesse procedure may be inadequate to make a bigger cultural or a social professional impact on an individual. So I like to combine small things. So let's show some examples. Let's say someone's got a small eye bag, a little bit of hollowness, and even in their early 30s, and it may be just a little bit of fat grafting around the eyes or a tiny eye bag removal. You combine that with something like meso-Botox. Encourage you to listen to my 25-minute video where I talk about that, where it improves quality of skin, texture improvement with that, and maybe a little bit of minor lip enhancement. These 2 to 3 small procedures, all 3 of which are minor in the sense that they don't necessarily add up to a large visual impact, but having multiple small finesse elements can cumulatively add up to a bigger social professional impact. So of course what you're not wanting is someone going, oh my God, you had a rhinoplasty, or oh my God, you had a facelift. But if it's done, is even as you look at my before and afters on facelifts, you take a 36-year-old with a very big, heavy neck, you may never have noticed, but when I bring it up really well, the before and after is dramatic. But that person in real life really looks very natural, and no one can tell that it was done. It just looks better. And so a component of this finesse concept is not just doing beautiful, small fine-tuned things, but overall making a better social professional impact. Why is that important? Because if you said, well, Dr. Lamb, all I want is my tipolonero, I'll be happier. But ultimately, the reason why people are so attracted to these finesse procedures is that when you have a side-by-side, there's something prettier with the face. And for me, if it's too subtle, it doesn't impact you, it may not be worth it, and you may want to look at stacking a few of these small elements to make these finesse procedures more impactful. Why is that important? The why is so important, not just the what. The motivation and the reason why a finesse procedure, whatever procedure it may be, is important, is to make you look better on a social professional level. You say, well, I'm not doing it for Tom, Dick, and Harry down the street. I'm not looking for Susie Q to give me a compliment. But number one is the fact that if you spent $10,000 with me, $20,000 with me, and no one thinks you look better, no one's giving you a compliment, there is a negative psychological degradation where you look at it and you go, well, you know what? Maybe it wasn't worth all this. Maybe the doctor wasn't as good as I thought, even though you asked me for a subtle improvement. But if you get 3 or 5 compliments where they don't know what you did, but they feel like you look better, then psychologically that finesse procedure, in my opinion, would be worth it. So a great example, I talked about this in one of my videos, a 41-year-old that all she did was just some meso-Botox. Now she's done a lot of little fillers with me, a lot of little other non-surgical therapies with me, but she had 5 people compliment her and said she looked better, but she couldn't see it because she was, again, left brain looking and did every pore go away. But that's only one procedure. Now, she's had a lot of other things that just made her look so much younger than her age. But that one treatment, she said she didn't see it, but 5 other people commented on her. There is no way, if 5 people think you look better and they don't know what it is, that you don't feel better about yourself. And that is the impact of right brain thinking. Again, I encourage you to look at that video that I talk about. So the summary of finesse plastic surgery or finesse procedures, to me, it has to be a big enough change that if you get some compliments that you look socially better when you photograph, that it may be better if you stack a few small procedures together, or the things that we think are finesse to the layperson's perception is absolutely not finesse at all, in the sense you got a big hump reduction, the tip looks a lot better, but because it looks so natural, your interpretation, it's a finesse procedure. But this is a very popular word out there in the community that I wanted to define for you in psychosocial, dynamic ways that will help you understand better sort of my philosophy about it.